I made the ultimate mistake in buying my first house, trusting someone else's judgment before my own. My fiancée, to be precise, who picked the location, semi-rural, backing onto an Australian bush reserve, and the house itself, old and dilapidated but, in his words, with a lot of character, convincing me he knew an investment and a bargain when he saw one. We had our whole future mapped out and I was happy to just nod and agree with him. So I signed the paperwork and paid the deposit on our future marital home, and then a week after it was all finalized, he broke off the engagement. I was down one fiancé and up one property that I hated and was barely inhabitable. I had paid the entire deposit and he had been going to use his savings to start the renovations straight away. After the initial relationship mourning period, I went into a fuck him action mode and moved into the house. I had bought, along with all the tools and equipment my dad would let me borrow, along with a patchwork knowledge of DIY renovation projects from Google. I wanted to get the place up to scratch and sell it for a profit so I could buy a property somewhere I actually wanted to live. My first night I slept badly, old sheets and a mattress on the floor, waking up sweating at every rustle outside. I had never lived anywhere but the city before, and the sound of living creatures, pushing through the undergrowth, snorts, and animal keening, had me on edge. Even if I could rationalize it, I lay tangled in my clammy bedding, frozen in fear, listening, feeling like an intruder waiting to be discovered. The next few days were tough. I felt isolated and inept, both of which were true. I discovered I had bad reception on my mobile when I tried to call my dad for advice on preparing brick for paint, and the biggest successes I had were clearing branches from the garden and installing a new globe on the back veranda light. Another night soon after, I heard scratching sounds just outside my window and on the veranda. I thought it was a possum or something, but it sounded bigger, and the scratching was loud and frantic. I swallowed my fear and walked to the glass sliding doors that lead into the garden, switching on the light I had installed. I saw a dark shadow move near the house. The bushes at the end of the garden leading into the forest suddenly shake as something crashed through them. It was big, whatever it was, and solid like a hog but with longer legs. It was fast too, loping on all fours, out of sight before I even had time to process what I was seeing. The next night I was ready, and when I heard the scratching again, I all but ran to the light switch. But nothing happened. The switch didn't work. I suddenly felt vulnerable and exposed in front of the glass doors, as though any number of lurking creatures I couldn't see outside in the pitch blackness could all see in. I skulked back to bed, lying awake with my basically useless mobile phone still clenched in my hand just in case. All the while that scratching went on around the house. At one point it sounded like fingernails on my window. Two things I discovered that morning: there were legitimate scratches on my windowsill, etched deeply not just through the flecking paintwork but into the wood, and why my outside light didn't work. The globe was gone. Completely removed. Like unscrewed and taken somewhere. I was getting very scared at this point. I drove into town to go to the hardware store and to get reception to call my dad. I must have sounded crazy in the phone call. I was getting hysterical and I hadn't actually spoken to another human properly for over a week. I speculated through tears that it was my ex, messing with my mind. Knowing about the breakup, and the financial pressure of trying to get the house ready for resale, he tried to calm me down. Told me I just wasn't used to the forest wildlife and that he would take time off work to come and help me in a couple of weeks. It was enough to convince me I was imagining things, get my supplies and groceries, and head back home. Things escalated after that. The new light globe I bought was taken the night after I installed it. This time it was shattered on the top step outside of my front door, the opposite side of the house, and I cut my bare feet on it the next morning. The plumbing that had been fine up to that point suddenly started spewing forth a foul-smelling black muck with the texture of custard out of every faucet. I kept finding dead animals at the back of the garden near the forest. Lizards or snakes, birds, a rat, a possum, and then one day, half of a dog. The front half only, its hindquarters gone, insects going to work on the poor animal's eyes and tongue. I dug as deeply as I could and buried it, putting the only flowers I had, some dandelions, on the grave. Another time I left some laundry pegged and drying on the washing line overnight and found it scattered across the garden the next morning. There had been a strong wind, true, but I followed the trail of my clothes blown unfeasibly deep into the forest. Some items I never recovered at all. I didn't search far amongst the trees for my clothes. I felt watched. I felt like I was being left a trail. To what end I had no idea. Suddenly the house seemed like a sanctuary, and with the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, I ran back, my arm full of what clothes and linen I had recovered, billowing behind me. During the day I would go into a frenzy of activity, scrubbing, sanding, ripping out the kitchen cupboards and varnishing the floorboards. At night I was a wreck and barely slept even though I was exhausted. It felt like the backyard was getting shorter and the forest was encroaching closer, the animal noises growing ever louder and always that scratching, like something was trying to get inside. It was a relief when my dad arrived to stay, for so many reasons. Someone with more DIY know-how than me and someone to tell me I wasn't going insane. There has definitely been some kind of animal activity out here, you are right. Something is trying to burrow under the foundations. I've got a surprise for you, he told me, already looking pleased with himself. He had bought electric fence wiring and steel posts, along with a battery energizer. Having grown up on a farm, Dad had done this before for temporary grazing pastures for cattle, and we spent the day setting it up along the existing fence posts that ran along the edge of the property where it met the forest. Smugly, he assured me that the fence would give whatever animal it was the right idea, and we sat on the back veranda with a couple of beers until dusk, discussing our next projects for the house. That night he set up a sleeping bag on the floor of the living room, the room with the glass doors looking out onto the back veranda, and I went to bed as usual. For the first time in weeks, I fell into a deep sleep. I have awoken abruptly, however, just after 2 a.m. by the most horrific, agonized screaming I have ever heard. I thought it was my dad at first, and ran into the living area just as he was running to my room thinking it was me. The noise went on and we looked out the glass doors and in the dim moonlight, saw a dark shape on 4 legs, wrestling with the electric fence wires like it was trapped in them. The screaming changed, it became less frightened and took on a breathless, angry grunting. Sparks started spurting from the energizer, and in the erratic glow, we saw the creature raise itself onto its hind legs. I heard my dad mutter, "What the hell is that?" in no more than a whisper, and the animal instantly froze. It was impossible to tell in the dark, but I swear it was looking straight at us, not moving despite the pulsing electric wire still wrapped around it. I was gripping my dad's arm and we were both still and tense. Whatever it was, at that moment, raised on its hind legs, it looked vaguely human. But the proportions were wrong. Its torso was too broad, its face too long, its legs bent out at strange angles. It raised its head like it was sniffing the air. And then it charged, straight at the house, straight at us. The wires snapped like twigs and you could hear the solid weight of it, thudding on the ground as it barreled through the garden towards us. Dad yelled, "Car!" over and over again, and I don't know when he picked up his ute keys, but I am glad he did. We ran through the front passage, stopping for nothing, leaving the front door swinging on its hinges. As we wrenched open the doors of the ute, there was a sound of shattering glass, and we knew it was in the house. The car was sputtering to life, and Dad was shoving the gear stick into place before I had even closed the passenger door. We hurtled down the driveway. It was a couple of kilometers until the nearest main road. I have always thought of my dad as the epitome of safe driving, but we were going so fast, only headlights for guidance, that I swore we were going to hit one of the trees. I yelled at him to slow down, and all he said to me was, "Rear view." I watched in my side mirror and saw nothing at first. The driveway was full of bends designed to slow cars down. On a straight stretch, I saw what Dad had seen, that same, dark, hulking form bounding behind us at what seemed impossible speeds. At the next corner in the road, it disappeared into the bush. It was cutting the corners to keep up with us. My heart was icy. I could have vomited with fear. I am so grateful my dad was composed enough to focus on getting us out of there. We made it to the main road, and in the welcoming glow of the streetlights, there was no sign of pursuit. "You're not living there again," my dad told me, simply, like I was ever going to disagree. We stayed at a motel for a few nights, met up with an old farming friend of Dad's in the area to borrow his rifle, and went mustered our courage to go back in the daylight. The place was torn to shreds inside. There wasn't a curtain or scrap of carpet untorn. Every window and every mirror had been shattered, and the wooden floorboards had what looked like claw marks scratched deeply into them. The mattress in my bedroom was intact, but soaked in blood, with an unrecognizable rotting animal carcass draped across it, skin shredded, bones gnawed, and decay rapidly setting in. My dad paid to have a company bulldoze the house for me. We told them a pack of wild dogs must have gotten in. I sold the land for a loss and moved back in with my parents. I still feel uneasy when I drive past any sort of bushland, especially at night. Sometimes, over the blare of the radio and hum of the engine, I even think I hear that same screaming noise deep within the trees, like it is following me still. "Oh my God," Sophie said, and fell back against the sheets, exhausted. "I haven't been fucked like that since I was a little girl." I fell down next to her, panting as well, and laughed. "Sophie, that's terrible." I grabbed the pillow from beneath my head and hit her with it, and her breasts jiggled. "What can I say? You bring out the worst in me." She smiled beneath her messy hair, moist with sweat. "Ha! Don't I know it?" I smiled back. "You'll pay for that later." Sophie threw the pillow back, and it hit me in the face. We fell asleep, and when we woke up, the evening had turned night. "Damn," I said. "Now my sleep cycle's going to be all messed up." Sophie got out of bed and got dressed. She slipped on her watch and looked at its face. "Double damn, I'm going to be late for Lydia's party." She pulled her sweater over her head. "I've got to run, dear, but it's been smashing as always." She bent down to kiss me, and I kissed her on the lips. "Of course, always too busy for little old me," I said wistfully. "Sigh, what is a boy to do?" I put the back of my hand up against my forehead dramatically and laughed. She stuck out her tongue at me. "Bye, Tommy." "Bye, Sophie." I got dressed and headed out to the bar. I was meeting Jack at 10. It had started to rain, and then night felt cold and alive, earlier than it was. It was when I passed by the alley on 73rd next to the Chinese restaurant, the narrow one that somehow seemed extra dark and always freaked me out ever since I had started noticing it, that I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a mix between a yelp and a growl. I stopped in my tracks, not knowing whether to investigate or run. My choice was made for me though. A woman stumbled out of the alley. The sight of her made my blood run cold. She was wearing a shredded tank top and jeans, both soaked in blood. She had blood in her hair and on her face too. There was so much of it that it was pooling down by her feet. I wanted to call out to her, but my voice was stuck in my throat. She didn't need me to say anything though. She was already making her way over to me. "Are you hurt?" I managed to whisper, but the look on her face answered that for me. It wasn't a look of pain or fear. It was a look of determination, of anger, of hatred. It was then that I began wondering if the blood was hers or someone else's. I panicked, fearing for my life. I should have run, I know that now. But hindsight is 20/20. I guess the adrenaline made me think that I was stronger than her. Plus, I thought to myself, what if she is hurt and needs help? Did I really want to walk away from someone who could be dying? She was only a few feet away from me when she fell to the ground. I should have asked her if she was okay. I should have said that I was going to get help. I should have run. But I didn't. I did the opposite. I walked up to where she was sitting, and I crouched down next to her. That was where everything went wrong. Suddenly, the woman jumped up, and before I could move, she threw me to the ground. My vision turned starry as a searing white pain burst through my skull. I only partially saw her face as she bent toward me. I couldn't tell if it was just the blurriness, but were her teeth sharpened? Now is not the time to worry about people's dental hygiene, I reminded myself, trying to pull myself away from whoever this crazy bitch was. My head immediately disagreed, screaming in agony. The woman barked out a laugh above me. There was nothing else I could do but slowly, pathetically, painfully try to drag myself across the sidewalk and as far away as possible. With every shift of my body, she took a patronizing step towards me. Ah shit. I finally hit the wall. She started bending down towards me again. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a low moan. I was powerless against whatever she was going to do. Without warning, her head jerked hard to my neck and ripped at the skin, leaving a huge, gaping wound, as her nails dragged down my chest. I don't remember if I physically screamed, but mentally I have never been louder. A few more bites and I was on the verge of passing out. From the distance, somebody screamed, and all I could think in my fucked up state was, same. For some reason, the woman attacking me seemed off-put by this and got up, slinking back into the alley, tripping onto her hands and knees as she did. As red and blue flashes soon came into my quickly fading vision, I realized that somebody must have called the police or an ambulance. I vaguely noticed two people run over to with some sort of contraption and they began to lift me up onto it. "There," I whispered, trying to point to the alleyway, but my arm falling miserably to my side. "What?" one of the people said. "The woman," I slurred out. They didn't seem to understand. "It's all right, sir, we're going to take you to help." I kept trying to tell them who attacked me, but to no avail, as I passed out almost as soon as they rolled me into the ambulance. I woke up in a hospital bed with no recollection of anything that had happened the night before. Very slowly, the pieces started to fill in. I tried to sit up, but there was so much pain everywhere that I immediately collapsed again. Rendered immobile, all I could do was wait for someone to come check in on me. What felt like forever later, I noticed two people standing outside my door. I didn't recognize them, but I could recognize that they seemed to be arguing over something. Eventually, the man ran his hands over his face before quietly stepping into my room. "Tommy," he said, "good to see you awake. I'm Dr. Engelman." What? I couldn't manage any more words than that. I truly was exhausted. Yes. There are quite a few things to tell you. Would you like the good news first or the bad news? Good news, I croaked out through a parched mouth and cracked lips. I saw his eyebrows raise a fraction as he ticked off a box that read cognizant and responsive. He looked back up at me and saw my eyes on his clipboard, which he turned so that I couldn't read it. "Well, Tommy, the good news is that we saved your life. You will recover all your motor functions, and mostly lead a normal life." He stopped talking and looked at me. "Bad news?" I croaked, drinking some water. "Well, not sure exactly how bad it is. Or if it is entirely bad. There is quite a bit of cosmetic scaring from the animal attack, and once we get you fit enough to leave of your own recognizance, or a family member comes to get you, we can discuss some options in that respect. Now, the odd news. The animal that attacked you seems to have infected with what seems to be some sort of benign form of rabies." I sat up suddenly, in shock. The doctor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Tommy, please, relax. I said it was benign, which means we believe it is harmless." I was still skeptical, and Engelman could see it, plain as day, on my face. "We treated you while you were unconscious for rabies. That's part of the muscle soreness you're feeling, and it seems to have paid off. You're a lot better off than you were when they brought you in here 2 weeks ago." I dropped my water cup, and found my voice again. 2 weeks? It made my throat raw. What there? "Please tell me you're fucking with me." Engelman gave me a sheepish look and explained. "You presented with swelling of the brain and the bite was severely infected, and we thought it prudent to place you in a medically induced coma." I sat there and took in the news. I asked absent-mindedly for a phone to call Sophie or my folks. I called Sophie first. "Tommy," she exclaimed, "I'm already on my way with your parents. They called them, then they called me as soon as you were awake." We chit-chatted about how I was feeling, and what all I couldn't remember. In less than 20 minutes they all three burst into my room. It hurt to talk. Not much had changed since I was attacked. I was a missing person for a few days before everyone was sorted out. Then I asked Soph to close the door. "Listen, it wasn't an animal, it was a woman that bit me." They looked at me sideways. "Tommy, my mother could, I think they would be able to recognize if it was a person." Soph sat her hand on my head. I shook it under her fingernails for a refreshing scratch. That simple action soothed me. Ever since waking up it had felt like my head was being split slowly in half. It felt like every muscle I had was stiff and sore. I had constantly felt on edge, and the attack from 2 weeks ago flashed through my mind. I could still see the woman's hunched back, the mania in her eyes, her jagged teeth. Wait, was it really a woman? My mother had a point. Maybe the doctors were right. Maybe it really was a rabid animal that had attacked me. My head pained me. My vision swam. I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I felt happy with Sophie there, scratching my head. "Everything's going to be all right, babe," she said. I closed my eyes. "Thanks. Thanks for coming here so quickly." "It's fine," Sophie said. "You should really be thanking Dr. Engelman and the other doctors here. They saved you. We were scared to death, Tommy. We thought we'd lost you. I spent about a week here, waiting by your side." "I'm sorry. Fuck, I'm so sorry." "There's nothing to be sorry about, son," my father said. "None of this is your fault. We're just glad you survived. The others weren't so lucky." "The others?" I croaked. My mother slapped my father's arm and said something to him in a hushed whisper, but he continued. "There were a few other victims. Others round the area who got attacked by the same animal. 10 people died that night, maybe more." I recalled the scream I had heard on the night of the incident. So it had been another victim. "That's terrible." "Holy shit," I said. Sophie told me more. Word is that the doctor and his team proposed the same coma treatment for the others. Unfortunately, it wasn't as effective for them. Apparently, you were all in critical conditions, and the treatment was a Hail Mary that may or may not have worked. That's not what Dr. Engelman said," I stammered. She patted me on the head, ruffling my hair, comforting me. "He was probably trying to lighten the load for you. You've been through a lot, babe. Don't worry about any of that, sweetie," my mother said soothingly. "You're safe now, and that's all that matters. We don't have to worry about anything else." We were interrupted by someone knocking on the door. My father went to get it. "It's Dr. Engelman," he said. "They want to do a quick checkup to make sure you're all right." Soph, we have to wait outside." As a team of doctors began to file inside, bearing all sorts of notes and equipment, my mother and girlfriend got up to leave. Sophie gave me a quick hug, embracing me in my bed. She pecked me on my right cheek. And then she said something into my ear in a subtle, hushed whisper. 3 words. 3 words that sent a chill crawling down my spine. "Don't trust him." My parents and Sophie left and Engelman came back into the room, a big grin across his face. "You're feeling better, son, quite an ordeal you've been through. These are the sorts of things he said. He said they were conditionally releasing me but wanted me to come back in a couple days for observation. I signed some forms. They gave me my things back." Engelman was still grinning next to me the whole time, then finally said goodbye and disappeared into the labyrinthine green hallways of the hospital with his brown clipboard. Mom, Dad, and Sophie were waiting for me at the exit. We all hugged and Sophie kissed me. "I love you, son," my dad said. "I'm just glad you're all right." "I love you too, Dad," I said. "I just want to go home." Mom and Dad said goodbye and got into their white Chevy and drove away. Sophie and I got into her car and took off out into the night. It was dark outside and the moon was bright and full and round and white. 2 weeks, I thought. It feels like months have passed. It felt like time had no meaning anymore. I scratched behind my ear and looked at the hairs on my arm. They seemed darker then, I remembered somehow. Sophie said how crazy everything was and how she'd thought I was dead. She started to cry and I watched her wipe away tears glistening in the moonlight with her index finger. Her left hand stayed on the steering wheel but I could see she clutched it tightly. It was dark in the apartment. The only light was that of the full moon pouring in through the bay windows. I didn't turn on the lights. For some reason I didn't feel like it, just threw my things on the floor and kicked off my boots. Sophie reached for the light switch but I grabbed her hand. "Tommy," she said softly. Her cheeks were still wet from crying. "What are you doing?" "Oh," I said and kissed her. My lips were still dry. She kissed me back hard and then held me and in the darkness, I couldn't quite tell but it sounded like she was crying again. "I missed you so much," she said. I put my hands on her and we kissed again. Her tongue was warm and soft in my mouth. And it tasted good. Like, really good. Have you ever had a steak that was so perfectly cooked that you had to resist from shoving the whole thing in your mouth? It was like that, only better. I couldn't help myself. I bit her tongue. Ow. Sophie screamed and jumped up. What the fuck, Tommy? I started apologizing profusely, tripping over my words as I took a gentle step towards her. Babe, I don't know what I mean, I didn't it. As I kept walking towards her, I could feel myself wanting to bite into her flesh again. Oh God. It was overwhelming. I spent my entire consciousness trying to push it back down my throat. I don't even remember how I got her to sit back down again, but somehow we were back on the couch together. Close. Very close. It was like I could smell her heartbeat. It was right there. In her throat. And I needed it down mine. Something animalistic came from deep inside me and I started ripping apart her skin, trying to get whatever it was I needed from her. I hear her screams for a moment and then suddenly, they stopped. I wasn't even aware of what I was doing. It just felt right, the taste of her skin and the texture of her blood, and finally, I knew why that woman attacked me like this. Oh shit. I don't know why that thought snapped me out of my craze, but suddenly, I sat back and looked at what I had done. There was Sophie, or what was left of Sophie, covered in dark red from my couch to my kitchen. I had done that. Yet, I felt almost nothing. I knew, deep inside me, that I should be panicking, hyperventilating, running screaming out of my building, but that part was silenced by everything else in me. I calmly stood up and walked into my bathroom. It was only when I looked in the mirror that I began to feel. There was my reflection, except, it looked nothing like me at all. Suddenly, I had a huge range of hair all over my chin, some covering the rest of my face. As I internalized what I saw, I raised my hand to feel my face and saw that my hand, too, was suddenly covered in more hair than a dog's tail. Then sensed that none of that should have happened hit me all at once and I began to freak out. I clawed my skin, wishing desperately to be who I was only last month, when Sophie and I were happy and together and alive and normal, and it took what felt like forever for me to calm down. I'm still panicked. I'm still lost. But I made myself sit up and look back in the mirror. It was too much. Too much change. Too much hair. I know, it's fucked up to be sitting here worrying about a beard when my girlfriend's corpse is torn up in my living room. Nothing makes sense right now. Nothing has made sense since the night of the attack. You know, I was going to turn myself in. I was. I don't want to live like this, knowing what I did, knowing that I liked it, but there's only one thing that's stopped me. Just a minute ago, I got a call from Dr. Engelman. With a shaky hand, I slipped my phone out of my back pocket and picked it up. But before I could even say anything, he whispered, "SHHH. There's no time. I know what you just did. I know what you are. Don't worry. I'm coming. Just close all your blinds, alright? Don't let the moonlight in, and don't go outside. I'm coming." And with that, he hung up. So, what? I turn myself in, saying that I'm a werewolf now and be put in a mental hospital, or I wait here and hope that Dr. Engelman knows what he's talking about. I could run away, but that only increases the risk that I'll hurt another person. To me, it seems that I only have one option. I can only hope it's the right one. Still, as I sit here, waiting, Sophie's words keep playing in my mind, like she was still whispering them into my ear at this very second. Don't trust him. Do you ever get that feeling, the feeling, that somebody's following you? Maybe you tell yourself that it's just your imagination, but you still quicken your step, or close the bedroom door. After all, the news and sleep are full of stories about people who must have felt just what you're feeling and ended up dead. You don't want to look like an idiot who's scared of their own shadow, but then, you don't want to appear in tomorrow's news either. I've had that feeling my entire life. There's something following me. I was 5 years old when my parents were killed. One of my earliest memories is waking up to this sharp, tangy smell, coming downstairs and finding my mum and dad lying in a pool of blood. A neighbor called the police and the officers found me lying unconscious in the doorway. It wasn't too surprising that I'd fainted by all accounts. The scene was pretty grisly. The coroner said it looked like they'd been attacked by some sort of large animal, most likely a bear or a wolf, but nobody was quite sure how it got inside the house. The next incident happened 3 years later when I was 8 and my aunt and uncle, who were raising me, were slaughtered in their sleep. The same pool of blood, same coroner's report. I had no other living relatives, so I was put into foster care and was in and out of several homes for the rest of my childhood. I was a loving kid. I wanted to be friends with everyone. But the moment I got close to anybody, the same thing would happen. After a while, nobody wanted me. I once overheard a social worker refer to me as that weird kid with the curse. Luckily, I aged out of the system soon after that. I don't know why nobody made the connection sooner, but it was only when I was in college and my roommate was killed while I was in the room with him that the police began to get suspicious. I know what you're thinking, he obviously did it. You won't believe how many detectives have said the same thing. I've been in and out of police stations so much I should almost have my own revolving door. Every case there's always one cop who is convinced that I'm a serial murderer, but no evidence has ever been found against me. I'd almost say it was just a set of weird coincidences, but there are some similarities between the crimes. 1. It always happens to someone I'm close to, just after I've made a proper connection with them. 2. The victims always look like they've been mauled to death by some large animal, but there's usually no way it could have got into the house and no animal has ever been found. 3. There are often samples of saliva and, once, thick gray hairs, on the bodies, but DNA tests on these are always inconclusive. 4. I am always in the house during the attacks, but they only happen when I'm asleep or out of the room. Needless to say, this has had quite the effect on my life. I don't get on with the police, mainly because so many of them have tried to get me arrested over the years. I'm always paranoid that, one day, they'll choose to just shoot me rather than go through the futile search for evidence again. Of course, I don't really get along with anybody anymore. Having everybody you ever loved brutally murdered will do that to you. I don't talk to people. I don't let myself get close to people. I've quit several jobs just because I felt I was getting along too well with my co-workers. Though that's not as bad as the few times I've been too late. I think I'm too late now. I've always been good at avoiding girls. Always managed to leave whenever I started feeling something for one of them, but Susie got under my skin. She made me laugh, she made me smile, she held my hand while I cried and told her about my past and then said that she didn't mind about all of that. I think I went a bit mad. Now we're in the house together and I'm afraid to leave the room, afraid to fall asleep. I can feel that feeling like there's somebody in the room with us, but I can't see them. It's like they're standing right next to me, right in my blind spot. Like they're looking over my shoulder, looking at her, and waiting for me to leave. My vision's getting dimmer and I know I'm about to black out. I can feel the hair growing all over like ants crawling up through my skin and taste the blood in my mouth and smell it on my hands as my nails and teeth begin to lengthen. Susie leans against my shoulder and mutters something in my sleep, and suddenly, she's not Susie. Suddenly she's just meat and I can hear the blood pulsing through her veins, calling to me. It's happening again. Goddamn me, it's happening again.